very fast.
It is not the same variation that they have played twice here when it was the English Opening in classical games.
Yeah.
They see a completely different variation.
Move 3, G3 was played. That's the deviation. Bishop B4, E4. Well, already black is thinking, as just to show immediately on bishop C3, probably D takes E3, and black cannot take on E4 because queen D5 will appear on the board, and immediately a double attack. So white would be winning back the pawn. And I think E4 is an extremely surprising way of playing this game.
And that explains why Fabiano is thinking.
Yeah, it is a very good way of approaching a rapid game, that you want to make a surprise to your opponent. And even if it's a kind of a dubious move. E4 is played very few occasions. I'm pretty sure that E4 was prepared for the rapid part of the match. It is very clear. So black after E4, there are only very few games on this. I mean, less than 20 games. And black played castle, knight E2. Knight E2, black played C6. The idea of C6, of course, to play D5. But actually, we can say that it's a reversed color Rossolimo.
Oh, as we haven't seen enough Rossolimo in this match.
Exactly. So this is kind of funny because black probably can play D5 and sacrifice the pawn, possibly, and get some counter chances here.
Fabiano is spending quite some time in the opening. It is definitely the E4 move that has surprised him.
Absolutely, that now he has to decide whether he plays the Rossolimo with one tempo down, which is very tricky, especially if he did not prepare or he's not prepared with variations on this. So he has to decide whether he goes to D5 and somehow I was playing with the white pieces that I was sacrificing this pawn, but I'm not sure that with the pawn down you can afford that. Because white would be taking on D5, probably black tries to play bishop F5. His plan is to go bishop D3. And if, let's say, white goes D3, black can go knight D7 and later also knight B6. But you have to know what you're doing in other hands. So this is a first decision to be made by Fabiano, whether he's going to D5 with the tempo down in the Rossolimo, or he's going to play, let's say, D6, and then later on develop his bishop. In other hand, if he just wants to develop with D6, then it might be just white will be castling and later on to play D4, and white can get a fantastic, pleasant position, because the B4 bishop is, what is it doing there, right? So in a way, I think it was a very smart way of preparation by Magnus. And already he's up to 25 minutes and 50 seconds.
26 minutes. He started with 25.
Yeah, and he has 3 minutes of advantage already. But that's not the most, the biggest problem what black has right now. But it's not a nice start that at the move 6 already your opponent has more than 3 minutes, almost 4 minutes advantage in a rapid game.
Certainly, it's not a pleasant start. Just to recap also the situation, we have talked about their classical ratings for 3 weeks. It's the world number 1 and the world number 2 facing each other, 3 rating points difference. That's their classical rating. In rapid chess, we have different ratings, and Magnus Carlsen is world number 1 in all 3 time controls, in classical, rapid, and blitz. Magnus Carlsen's rapid rating is 2880, and Fabiano Caruana is world number 8 with the rating of 2789. That is 101 rating points below Magnus Carlsen. I think that's also one factor why everybody considers Magnus the heavy favorite, and the other is that Fabiano hasn't had any really good tournament in rapid chess, while Magnus has won World Rapid Championships, also the Grand Chess Tour. He has done well in rapid, unlike Fabiano.
Well, we have a move, a6.
Oh.
And, yeah, probably black wants to play b5 in the next move.
So not the Rossolimo type with d5, but instead b5, expanding on the queen side.
Yeah, it looks kind of a funny shape of pawns, right? a6 and a6, b7, c6, d7, but it's not going to last long, this structure. Well, actually, I was also checking the rating list, and which caught my eyes is that Dominguez is number 3 in rapid, and actually he's on the team of Fabiano. So probably they made some preparation and training games on rapid games, most likely. In the meantime, we have moves on the board. White castled and b5. Black played b5. Of course, is a logical continuation of a6. So now the question is, most likely white is not going to take on b5 because black would be taking with the a pawn. And then immediately this is the way when you don't make a single move with your piece and your rook can be very active on the a line. So what I'm expecting is either d3, looks like a very logical move. b3 is another option to be playing. Also, actually, well, a3 probably would be not possible or not good because black would be taking and just grabbing the pawn, and when white would like to gain back the pawn, then black can defend it with d5. Even though this might be an interesting game also, that white is taking back a pawn, black can develop. Actually, it is a kind of a very strange position because white has not a very good development, and also the d3 square can be weak, but it would be a lot of chaos. So a3 possibly also an option to be playing. I don't know whether d4 is possible, though. d4 is the most straightforward and challenging move for black, I believe. And we're seeing indeed. d4. Yeah, a lot of energy by Magnus. It seems he has all 3 pawns in the central squares, covering the central squares and pawn. Immediately black has to decide whether is he going to grab or just defending it with d6, the e5 pawn, or let's see what happens if black takes on d4, which would give up the center. And at this point, I think queen d4 can be also strong, and also knight d4 should be considered, because now already, if let's say black is taking a pawn, white could be going e5, and white has a great initiative. Black has to go back to e8, which after white would go knight e4, and it's such a beautiful position, huge initiative, great compensation by white. I mean, look at this. Almost all black pieces still on the back rank, and while white is having his knights in the center, he has this powerful fianchetto bishop. The other bishop goes to g5, so this would be very risky for black. And I see Fabiano just play d6, going the solid way, and which is absolutely understandable that you don't want to allow initiative for Magnus.
I'm slightly surprised by the posture of Magnus. We normally see him in his very confident poses, but now covering his face. This is not the typical Magnus thinking pose.
Well, of course, I mean, it's really, as I told you before, the jacket is off already.
Yes,
so
not practical for rapid and blitz.
Yeah, I mean, it is very clear that he knows it, that this is the opening phase of the game. These are the most important moves for the moment, where he can pose real trouble for Fabiano. If Fabiano will stabilize his position, developing his pieces, bishop to b7, knight to d7, he puts his queen to e7, let's say, I mean, then it will be a complicated game, which still might be the case that will be the outcome later on towards the middle game. But for now, there are questions. For example, should white go a3? And then black has to question himself whether does he want to take on c3 and grab the pawn. Can he do that at all? Because maybe for the moment it is possible. So this is a question, because if black goes bishop a5, then white could be playing b4. Black has to go all the way back to c7. And, well, probably here black is fine, because this would be too much of pawn moves with the white pieces. And the b4 bishop not necessarily stands better on b4 than on c7.
The a6, b5 idea of Fabiano has at least surprised Magnus in a sense that it's not his preparation anymore either. We are approaching a time situation where both players have approximately the same time, and of course that's much better for the challenger, that finally he's not behind on the clock.
Yeah, this is a very important information for him, that he surprised back Magnus, right, after this e4 system played. And yeah, I mean, to take on e5, it would be, I don't know, it wouldn't seem to be A3. So aggressive. So a3 was played. Now Fabiano has to decide whether to take on c3, play bishop a5, or possibly to take e takes d4, the intermediate move, with the idea if white is taking the bishop. But in the meantime, we have bishop c3 on the board, knight c3, and now most likely the pawn will be taken. And b takes c4. So we are having a very sharp situation now. Magnus sacrificed the pawn already. We are only at move 10. In other hand, white has the pair of bishops. Also, the development of white is better. And for the moment, queen e2 or queen a4 is not possible to attack the pawn on c4, because e takes d4 would be possible for black. So this is not possible. On the other hand, if white is taking d takes e5, d takes e5, and white would be attacking the c4 pawn by playing queen e2, which actually happening in the game, then black can go bishop e6, and for quite a long time, probably black will be able to hold on his extra pawn. So we have d takes e5, d takes e5. I would think that probably maybe Magnus will just ignore the exchange of queens and possibly will develop with his bishop to e3 or maybe to g5. I would think that bishop e3 could be strong for a later possibility of knight a4.
Knight
but
a4
he said
immediately. He doesn't mind the trade of queens. So what white has for the sacrificed pawn is the pair of bishops and the initiative too. With the move, with the trade on e5, he actually managed to isolate black's pawns. So you see that there are double c pawns, c4 and c6. Those are weak and isolated pawns.
Well, the importance of playing knight a4 immediately is that if black would go knight d7 to control these two squares of b6 and c5, then white is already able to play queen c2 attacking the c4, and black is not able to protect his pawn by playing bishop e6. While if black is going bishop e6 right now, then knight c5 could be unpleasant, or black definitely has to consider this option. Whether it's a problem or no, that's another story. But the black bishop will be captured. And also the white knight is more active on c5. So after knight a4, for example, if black would go queen a5 and queen c2, bishop e6, bishop e3, knight d7, this would be completely fine for black. So we have to see that if black is in time with his development, everything is fine. In other hand, after queen a5, white would be going bishop e3 again immediately, trying to control and give some unpleasant moments for black with knight b6 or bishop b6. And already after knight d7, white would be going queen c2, and the c4 pawn would fall off there after black has a worse position, definitely. So this is the challenge what black is facing right now, how to make sure that the c4 pawn can be protected. For example, bishop e6, of course, has to be considered, because after knight c5, for example, what happens if black goes queen e7? If, let's say, knight e6, queen e6, bishop e3. Because if not bishop e3, but let's say white would be going somewhere else, something else, black can consider to try to play c5, knight c6, and go all the way to d4.
Indeed, this is the variation we are going to see. Bishop e6 has been played by Fabiano.
So let's see what he's going to be up to after knight c5. The other question is whether white wants to take on d8 or not. Usually it's the case that none of the players would like to give up the tension, because after queen d8, rook d8, suddenly black is who is taking over the d file, which actually is a very important file in this structure. Also for black it would be important to have his rook to a7, b7, or later on to b8, but definitely to put it on the b file to put pressure on the b2 pawn. So for black it is important to get hold on the c4 pawn. Well, the big question is knight c5, of course. That's the huge question, whether knight c5 is giving black a problem or no. And after queen e7, what we just looked, knight e6 is one of the options, but also bishop e3. But after bishop e3, I think black is just in time to play knight g4, and after the white bishop cannot move away because he has to be protecting the c5 knight. And if knight e6, black would be playing the intermediate move knight e3, takes queen e6, and black is just having a great game, I think, because first of all, for quite a few moves, he's going to be getting hold on the c4 pawn, but also for white, this is absolutely not on his advantage to have these double pawns on the e file, and also the fianchetto bishop is practically eating his pawn.
Queen takes d8 has been chosen by Magnus, and the next move can be knight c5 if he wants to follow this variation.
Let's see if it's knight c5 going to be on the board.
Or he can also develop his bishop, the c1 bishop.
Yeah, now bishop e3, bishop g5 is also possible, but on the other hand, on bishop e3, black goes knight bd7, and now black is doing quite fine, because it is extremely difficult to capture, to attack the c4. I mean, rook c1 is possible with the idea of bishop f1 and try to capture the pawn, but for the moment it's still not threatening exactly, because the e4 pawn has to be protected. And here probably black would be playing something like rook b8. Also knight g4 is possible. It's always a possibility for black, and white not necessarily has a good square for his bishop. Because, for example, if white goes bishop b2, then, well, even I can consider knight c5.
Bishop e3.
But let's see what we have. Bishop e3 we have on the board. So now, actually, the threat is if, let's say, just black would make a random move h6, then white would be going knight b6, rook a7, and he would be able to jump to c4 to take back the pawn, because the rook on a7 is hanging. So this black obviously cannot do, but knight d7 was played, which is actually, there was no need to think.